The scripture passage today comes from Exodus 17, 1 through 7. At the Lord's command, the people of Israel left the Sin Desert and moved from place to place. Eventually they came to Rephidim, but there was no water to be found there. So once more the people grumbled and complained to Moses. "Give us water to drink," they demanded. "Quiet," Moses replied. "Why are you arguing with me? And why are you testing the Lord?" But tormented by thirst, they continued to complain. "Why did you ever take us out of Egypt? Why did you bring us here? We, our children, and our livestock will all die." Then Moses pleaded with the Lord, "What should I do with these people? They are about to stone me." The Lord said to Moses, "Take your shepherd's staff, the one you used when you struck the waters of the Nile. Then call some of the leaders of Israel and walk on ahead of the people. I will meet you by the rock at Mount Sinai. Strike the rock, and water will come pouring out. Then the people will be able to drink." Moses did just as he was told, and as the leaders looked on, water gushed out. Moses named the place Massah, the place of testing, and Meribah, the place of arguing, because the people of Israel argued with Moses and tested the Lord by saying, "Is the Lord going to take care of us or not?" This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I know we have some pretty big baseball fans in this congregation. Unfortunately, the opening day of baseball season has been delayed for at least 2 weeks thanks to the coronavirus. And this means that they'll be playing baseball into December if they don't shorten the season. The Mariners' home opener was supposed to be on March 26th against the Texas Rangers. The governor has set gatherings at a maximum of 250 people, which should have been more than enough for the Mariners. In fact, it gives them a goal to shoot for. I know that's a pretty low blow, but it's hard to get optimistic about the Mariners' upcoming season. In fact, that has been the case for many years now. The world of sports is a world that lives by the mantra, "What have you done for us lately?" Case in point, you may recall, if you are a baseball fan, when the Boston Red Sox fired their manager, John Farrell, back in 2017. By all accounts, the Boston Red Sox had a pretty successful season that year. They won the American East title for a second year in a row. They finished the season with 93 wins and 69 losses, ahead of their arch rivals, the New York Yankees. They took the Houston Astros to 4 games in the divisional series. And yet after they lost to the Astros in Game 4, the ownership of the Red Sox fired John Farrell, even though he had 1 more year left on his contract. And we know now that Houston had been cheating all along. Dave Dombrowski, the president of baseball operations for the Red Sox, had this to say about the firing. He said, "I thought it was the appropriate time to make a change for the betterment of the organization." John Farrell had managed the Red Sox to a World Series win in 2013, only 4 years before this. And they had won the American East pennant the last 2 years. But I guess that wasn't enough. It's all a matter of expectations, really. I mean, if John Farrell managed the Mariners to a division title, he would be one of the most highly respected men in the Pacific Northwest. In fact, I'm sure that if that was the case, Farrell would be given a long-term contract extension by the owners of the Mariners rather than fired. And if John Farrell had managed the Mariners to a World Series title, he could probably run for governor of the state and win. But apparently in Boston, it's all about, "What have you done for me lately?" We live in a "what have you done for me lately" world. We live in a "what have you done for me lately" world. And if this is true in sports, it is especially true in our relationship with God. We often take God for granted. We're quick to forget all that God has done for us. This leads us to apathy or worse. How can we avoid the "what have you done for me lately" attitude when it comes to our relationship with God? That's what I want to focus on today. As I said earlier, we're quick to forget all that God has done for us. Of course, this has been the human condition for a very long time, if not from the beginning of time. Case in point, the Israelite people. They have just been liberated from their slavery to Egypt. God has done this through a series of 10 plagues that only affected the Egyptian people. And the last plague, the Passover, took the lives of every firstborn child of the Egyptians, including the Pharaoh's own son. And that's what made the Pharaoh reluctantly give them their freedom. But as if that wasn't enough, after the Israelite people had left, the Pharaoh had a change of heart. And so he pursues them with his troops to the edge of the Red Sea. The Israelites were trapped. It appears they were about to be wiped out by Pharaoh's army or taken back into captivity. But God miraculously intervenes on their behalf. First, God places God's self between the Egyptian army and the Israelite people in the form of a pillar of cloud and fire. And then God opens a path for the Israelite people through the sea. They walk through the seabed as if on dry land. And when the Pharaoh and his troops pursue them into the sea, that's when God causes the water to close in upon them, and all of the Egyptians are drowned. Well, those are some pretty incredible and memorable events, wouldn't you say? Those moments must have been foundational faith stories for the Israelite people. Or so it would seem. But they apparently are soon forgotten. They had not been wandering in the wilderness for long before the people started to complain. They complained about not having enough meat to eat. They wished they could return to Egypt, return to their slavery, because at least there they had plenty to eat. After this complaint, God provided them with quail. God also provided them with manna. But this is still seemingly not enough. As they continued their wilderness journey, they came to a place where there was no water. It is the desert after all. Again, the people started to complain to Moses, "Give us water to drink. Why did you ever take us out of Egypt?" You know, that second complaint must have really hurt. Moses appeals to God, afraid for his life at this point. God tells Moses to take the leaders to the rock at Mount Sinai, and then, with all the people watching, he was to strike the rock with his staff and water would come gushing out. That's exactly what Moses did. Waters came gushing out of the rock, apparently enough to satisfy all their thirsts, as well as to give their animals something to drink. Moses gave the place a double name, Massah and Meribah, the place of testing and the place of arguing. Because they kept asking, "Is the Lord going to take care of us or not?" In a very short time, the Israelites seem to have forgotten everything that God has done for them. And this theme would be repeated over and over again throughout the scriptures. I think this pattern tends to repeat itself because it is part of our human nature. We seem to have trouble with our memories, both short-term and long-term memories. It seems we easily forget everything that God has done for us when we encounter a challenge or go through a crisis like this coronavirus. When life doesn't go exactly as we planned, we get angry with God, or we at least get impatient with God. I want to suggest some ways we can avoid the "what have you done for me lately" attitude when it comes to our relationship with God. Are you ready? First, foster an awareness of God's presence and help in your life. Foster an awareness of God's presence and help in your life. In my last church in Centralia, we began a practice that all groups followed, whether they were administrative groups or fellowship groups. We would always start every gathering with the question, "Where have you seen God at work in your lives this past week?" You'll notice the question wasn't, have you seen God at work in your life this past week, but where have you? The question was asked this way as an acknowledgement that God is intimately involved in our daily living. We just need to develop the eyes to see God's handiwork. Sometimes we'll see God's handiwork in big ways, obvious ways, and other times we'll see it in small ways. Elmer Towns, author, tells a story that relates to this. He writes, "My wife and I went through college by faith. If we had not prayed together daily through all our difficulties, I don't know how we would have made it. I earned $1 an hour for driving a school bus, which was just enough to pay for our necessities, but there wasn't even a dime left over for a Coca-Cola. One evening, the only thing in the kitchen cabinet was a can of tuna, so my wife served tuna casserole. As we clasped hands to thank God for the food, I prayed, God, you know we are broke. You know it's 2 days until payday. You know that we are willing to fast until we get money, but we ask you to please take care of our needs." As we finished praying, the laundryman came to the door. Ruth met him to say, "No laundry today. We can't afford to have anything cleaned." But he had not come to pick up our laundry. The laundryman explained, "A few months ago, your landlord asked me to pass along $20 to you to pay you for having thawed out the pipes for him. I had forgotten about it until today." Now, some might say this was a coincidence, but Ruth and I say that our prayer together reminded the laundryman that he had $20 for us. He had been sent by God. In order to overcome our propensity to ask God, "What have you done for me lately?" we need to simply open our eyes to the many ways that God is involved in our lives. Another way we can avoid the "what have you done for me lately" attitude when it comes to our relationship with God is to remind ourselves of what God has already done for us. It is to remind ourselves of what God has already done for us. We need to remind ourselves of our foundational faith stories over and over again. And by foundational faith stories, I mean those faith stories or events in your life that you can point to as moments when God became very real for you. For the Israelite people, most of those foundational faith stories centered around their liberation and escape from Egypt. And later in their history, their return from exile in Babylon would also serve as a foundational faith story. And when we're going through difficult times and God seems distant and remote to us, and we are even tempted to abandon our faith, we too need to remind ourselves of our foundational faith stories. We need to remind ourselves of what God has done for us in the past. These foundational faith stories can be happy moments or they can be sad moments, but they have one thing in common. They are experiences in which all doubt was completely taken away, if only for a moment. One such experience in my life was when I was confirmed when I was 12 years old, which was rather ironic in that I attended very few of the confirmation classes. I was a pretty shy kid. I didn't really want to go to the confirmation classes, but I had to since my dad was the pastor of the church. But I figured out a way to get out of going to those classes early on. My parents would drop me off at the church, and I would wave goodbye to them. And as soon as they drove away and were out of sight, I would hightail it to another part of the building, far away from where the confirmation class was being held, and I would practice piano for 2 hours. Coincidentally, I had some of my best piano lessons during this time. And when my parents would pick me up, they would ask me how confirmation was, and I would tell them it was great. And so I attended very few confirmation classes, but the act of confirmation itself, when we took our vows of membership and we knelt while the pastoral staff laid hands on us, that was truly life-changing. As the pastors prayed over me, I felt a warmth just course through my entire body, and I'm pretty sure that was the Holy Spirit. I can still go back to that time in my mind's eye. And experience that overwhelming divine presence all over again. In order to avoid the "what have you done for me lately" attitude, remind yourself of your foundational faith stories. Lastly, in order to avoid the "what have you done for me lately" attitude, nurture a sense of gratitude in your life. Nurture a sense of gratitude in your life. People who ask, "What have you done for me lately?" often lack a sense of gratitude. They keep no memory of past blessings. Like the consumer culture that we live in, they are often looking for the next great thing, or they are blind to the blessings that are already all around them. The story from the life of the missionary David Livingstone illustrates this for us. David Livingstone lived and served in Africa from 1840 until his death in 1873. But there was one incident in Livingstone's life that illustrates why we need to be thankful in all things. Livingstone was eager to travel into the uncharted lands of Central Africa to preach the gospel. On one occasion, the famous 19th century missionary and explorer arrived at the edge of a large territory that was ruled by a tribal chieftain. According to tradition, the chief would come out to meet him there. Livingstone could go forward only after an exchange was made. The chief would choose any item of Livingstone's personal property that caught his fancy and keep it for himself, while giving the missionary something of his own in return. Livingstone had few possessions with him, but at their encounter, he obediently spread them all out on the ground: his clothes, his book, his watch, and even the goat that provided him with milk. Since chronic stomach problems kept him from drinking the local water, and to his dismay, the chief took his goat. In return, the chief gave him a carved stick, shaped like a walking stick. Livingstone was most disappointed. He began to gripe about what he viewed as a stupid walking stick. What could it do for him compared to that goat that kept him well? And then one of the local men explained. He said, "That's not a walking cane. It's the king's very own scepter, and with it you'll find entrance to every village in our country. The king has honored you greatly." The man was right. Through the chief and through that gift, God opened Central Africa to David Livingstone. You see, sometimes in our disappointment over what we don't have, we fail to appreciate the significance of what God has given us. Nurturing a sense of gratitude can help remind us of all of the amazing gifts that God has given us. If we can nurture a sense of gratitude, we'll never ask God, "What have you done for me lately?" In the world of sports, the question, "What have you done for me lately?" hangs over the head of every player and coach. And because of this, their employment is always tenuous at best, even if you are quite successful. But this should not be the case in our faith journeys. Instead of asking God what God has done for us lately, let us foster an awareness of God's presence and help in our daily living. Let us remind ourselves of our foundational faith stories, those moments in our lives when God became very real for us. And let us nurture a sense of gratitude for all of the blessings that God has poured out to us and that surround us day by day. And if we can do this, we'll remember God's faithfulness and we'll never again ask God, "What have you done for me lately?" Thanks for listening. Stay healthy and well.